This is Chapter 1 of The Wolf's Promise, written by Alexi Hartwood. The first thing I noticed about Pine Hollow was the quiet. Not the pretty kind you get in a spa brochure either. This was the kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing, the crunch of your tires over packed snow, the soft rattle in the glove compartment that I'd forgotten to fix 3 states ago. My phone had gone from 2 bars to 1 to no service in the space of 10 miles. The GPS map turned into a blank smear of pale gray, and then a cheerful message that might as well have said, "Good luck." It was fine. I'd told myself it would be fine for weeks. A remote cabin, a month off, fresh air, distance. I needed distance. Distance from the apartment that still smelled like his cologne, even after I'd scrubbed every surface. Distance from the coworkers who looked at me with that specific brand of pity reserved for women who'd rearranged their entire lives around a man who didn't stay. Distance from the version of myself who'd sent a resignation email at 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday because she couldn't spend one more morning pretending the fluorescent lights weren't a coffin. I had a bank balance that looked like a warning, and a new job contract in my inbox that would begin in 6 weeks, if I could make it to 6 weeks. If. I drove with both hands tight on the wheel, shoulders hunched like the cold was a physical thing that could reach through the windshield and grab me. The rental SUV's heater worked hard and still felt like it was losing. Every few miles, the road narrowed and the pines leaned closer, branches heavy with white, and I had the uneasy sense of being funneled somewhere rather than choosing a direction. A hand-painted sign appeared in the snow haze. Pine Hollow. P-O-P. 1,842. Slow down. I slowed down. The road was already telling me to. A main street took shape. The kind you see in small towns that refuse to be swallowed by time. 1-story buildings, a diner with fogged windows, and a neon open sign that glowed like a promise. A hardware store with a handwritten sale banner taped to the glass. A little grocery with a few trucks out front, all with mud on the wheel wells, like they belonged here. In a way, I didn't. I passed them like I was afraid the town would notice me. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I just didn't want to be seen. Being seen meant being asked questions. Being asked questions meant having to explain myself. And I didn't have a clean explanation. The cabin was supposed to be 15 minutes outside town. The listing had called it secluded and romantic. I had read those words and thought, quiet, not romantic. I was not arriving with anyone's hand in mine. I was arriving alone, with a trunk full of boxes and a grocery list I'd half-written and then abandoned, because even the act of planning meals for one had felt like admitting something. A narrow road peeled off the main highway. Miller Road, according to a crooked sign that looked like it had survived at least one collision with a snowplow. The plows had cleared it, but the snowbanks on either side were tall enough to make it feel like a hallway. Pine trees leaned in close, their branches heavy with white, and the light went strange, filtered through needles and cloud cover until it wasn't quite day and wasn't quite dusk. My headlights tunneled through the gray. It was early afternoon, but the clouds made it feel like evening already. The cabin came up suddenly, like it had been hiding behind the trees on purpose. It was smaller than the photos, which was probably a good thing. A dark wood rectangle with a steep roof, a little porch, a single window glowing faintly in the pale light. No smoke curled from the chimney. That made sense. No one had been here before me. It didn't make me feel better. I parked and sat for a second, hands still on the wheel, heart doing a strange, quick stutter, like it wasn't sure whether to be relieved or afraid. "This is what you wanted," I told myself. A fresh start. A hard reset. A place where nobody knew you. A place where you could sleep without waking up to the echo of your own last conversation. The one where he'd said, "I just don't see us anymore." Like I was a show he'd canceled after one season. I got out, and the cold slapped me awake. The air smelled sharp, like pine sap and something mineral. Snow squeaked under my boots. My breath came out in a little cloud that vanished almost immediately, like even my breathing was temporary here. I pulled my coat tighter and walked up to the porch. The steps were solid, but the railing wobbled when I grabbed it, which I chose to interpret as charm and not structural failure. The key was in a lockbox, exactly where the email said it would be. I punched in the code, pried it open with numb fingers, and held the key like it might be the only solid thing in my life. The front door stuck, like it didn't want to let me in. I had to shove my shoulder into it. The frame swelled in cold weather, apparently. When it finally opened, a breath of stale air rolled out, cold and cedar-scented and lonely. I flipped light switches. One worked, then another. The cabin lit up in warm pockets. A lamp in the living room, a ceiling light above the kitchen. The place was clean, if sparse. A couch with a plaid throw that had been washed so many times, it was more texture than color. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs. A wood stove in the corner that looked like it had been polished for photographs more than used. I dropped my purse on the counter and stood in the middle of the living room, listening. The quiet pressed in from all sides. No city hum, no neighbor's TV through a shared wall, no sirens, no footsteps above me, no NPR through someone else's kitchen window, no garbage truck at 6 a.m., no elevator ding announcing someone else's arrival. Just my own heartbeat. I walked to the window and pushed aside the curtain. Trees and snow and more trees. The driveway curved out to the road, and beyond that was nothing but forest. No porch lights from neighbors, no mailbox cluster, just pines standing in rows like they'd been assigned positions. A part of me unclenched. A different part of me panicked. Because now there was no distraction, no excuse, no noise to hide behind. It would just be me and my thoughts. And my thoughts had been terrible company lately. I told myself I could handle them. I told myself I was strong. I told myself I had left because I was choosing myself, which was the language my therapist used and which sounded empowering in her warm office, and sounded like a lie in a cold cabin in Montana. Then I saw the cell service icon still empty and felt an old, childish fear rise up. What if something happens out here? What if you slip on the porch, crack your head, and no one finds you for days? What if the car won't start? What if the power goes out? What if you made a mistake? I forced myself to breathe again. I was not going to spiral on day 1. I was not. I set my phone on the counter and began unloading boxes, one at a time. Pantry items first. Coffee, pasta, canned soup, the kind of groceries you buy when you don't trust yourself to cook anything complicated. Emergency provisions for a woman who used to host dinner parties and now couldn't stomach the thought of chopping an onion for one. I found the circuit breaker panel in a closet near the door. A handwritten label said, "Cabin." A second label said, "Generator switch in case of outage," in handwriting that was either very old or very hurried. That was reassuring, and also not. I opened cabinets. I checked the faucets. The water ran clear and cold. I turned the hot tap and waited until it warmed, watching the steam rise like proof that at least one thing in my life was functioning. The bedroom was at the back, A queen bed with crisp white sheets, a dresser with a cedar sachet in the top drawer, a closet that smelled like someone else's winter coats. I put my suitcase on the bed and stared at it. In some other version of this trip, I might have unpacked carefully, folding sweaters into drawers like I was building a home. Instead, I left the suitcase closed. I wasn't ready to claim the space. The wood stove became my project. I stood in front of it with my hand on the iron handle, trying to look like someone who knew what she was doing. There was a basket of kindling next to it, and a stack of split logs by the wall. The email had said, "Feel free to use the wood stove," like it was a coffee maker, like anyone could just light a fire. I had watched a YouTube video at midnight 2 nights ago. I remembered roughly: kindling first, then paper, then a log. Open the flue, check the flue. What was a flue? The metal handle thing at the top. I pulled it. Something opened. Good enough. I set kindling in the stove, then crumpled paper, then a log the way the man in the video had done it. He'd been wearing flannel and had a beard, and had made it look so easy I'd briefly wanted to marry him. I struck a match. The flame flared bright. I stared at it for a second too long, because it made me think of nights on my apartment balcony, smoking when I'd promised myself I was quitting, watching the city lights blur through tears I refused to name. I shook my head hard, like I could fling the memory away. I set the match to the paper and closed the door. The fire caught slowly, hesitant at first, then with a small rush, heat began to creep out. I sat on the couch and held my hands toward the stove, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. The cabin smelled better already. Wood smoke and pine and the sharp cold that edged in under the door. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten since a gas station breakfast sandwich somewhere in Idaho, one of those shrink-wrapped things that tasted like regret and processed cheese. I made a grilled cheese with the last of the bread I'd brought, standing at the counter because sitting at a table for one felt like a category I wasn't ready to accept. The cheese was perfect. The bread was just burnt enough to be satisfying. I ate it in 4 bites and felt absurdly proud of myself for managing food in a new place. After that, there was nothing left to do but exist. I wandered from room to room. I opened drawers. I found extra blankets, a flashlight with batteries that worked, a first aid kit with everything still sealed, a fire extinguisher that hadn't expired. All the things you don't think about until you're alone in the woods. The bathroom mirror was fogged from my earlier hot water test. I wiped it with my sleeve and looked at myself. My hair was pulled into a messy knot. My cheeks were red from the cold. My eyes looked too big in my face, the way they always did when I was tired or anxious, or both. I looked like someone trying to pretend she hadn't run, which was, unfortunately, accurate. My phone buzzed suddenly. My heart jumped. One bar of service had appeared like a small miracle. A text message popped through. "You there yet?" I could picture her back in Seattle. Warm apartment, hands around a mug of tea, worried because she knew me too well. She had watched me pack. She had stood in my apartment doorway, arms crossed, face doing that thing where she was trying to be supportive, but was actually terrified I was having a breakdown. She had hugged me so hard at the door that my ribs ached. "Are you sure?" she'd asked. I hadn't been sure, but I'd been tired of waiting to be sure. I typed, "Made it. Cabin is cute. Cold, though." I added a smiley face, because that was what you did when you were lying. Jen's reply came immediately. "Proud of you. Call me when you can." I swallowed. The knot in my chest tightened. Proud of you. As if being alone in a cabin was an achievement. Maybe it was. I typed, "Will do." The service bar vanished again. The phone went back to no signal. Like the town had allowed me one tiny thread to the outside world and then snapped it. I set the phone down and looked out the window again. The snow had started falling, soft, steady flakes that turned the world into a muted blur. The trees became shapes in the gray. The road disappeared. It was beautiful. It was also isolating in a way that made my skin prickle. I pulled the curtain closed. I turned on every lamp in the cabin, like I could ward off the dark with light. Then I sat on the couch again, closer to the stove, and listened to the crackle of the fire. A thought came, quiet and sharp. You are going to have to live inside your own life now. No more excuses. No more postponing. No more telling yourself you would deal with it later. Later had arrived. I hugged my knees to my chest and stared into the stove's glass window, watching the fire shift and flicker. Somewhere out there, Pine Hollow continued to exist without noticing me. People ate dinner. Couples argued. Dogs barked. Someone poured coffee in that diner with the fogged windows. A bartender wiped down a counter. Someone drove home on a road they'd driven 1,000 times and didn't think twice about the ice. And here I was, alone in a cabin on Miller Road, trying to convince myself that starting over wasn't the same thing as falling apart. The wind rattled the windows. The cabin creaked like it was settling into my weight. I didn't know if I belonged here, but I was here. And that had to be enough for day one.